Hi there folks, in today's demonstration I'm going to show you how we can build some advanced HTML tables in Power Automate. So out of the box there is an action, create HTML table, that allows you to turn a data source like a SharePoint list into an HTML table, but what if you want to highlight one of those rows based on a condition? And I say one or many rows. Equally, maybe you have a cell or cells that you want to change the color of based on a condition, or the text within those cells. Well, I have all those scenarios in today's demonstration, but before I jump into that, we will have a look at HTML so that we understand the basic principles of this demonstration. Now, in addition to that, just to make things interesting, I also have a demo that shows you how to turn that same data into a vertical table. So we're flipping that data onto its side so that rather than having the columns all on the top in the first row, we have those columns on the left-hand side as the first column within that table. Now, if that's something that interests you, please make sure you watch on. I would love a like and a subscribe. And without further ado, let's jump into the demonstration. So here I am in a SharePoint list, and it's all based on expenses with 3 columns: employee, expense amount, and expense description. And what we're going to do today is we're going to look at how we can implement some conditional formatting based on that employee being equal to Damien. Can we change the cell color? Can we change the row color? And equally, if we look at the expense amount, if that's greater than £50, can we change the text color? Well, the answer to all 3 of them is yes, we can, and that's what we're going to do today. But before we do so, I would like to look at a very basic flow. So looking at this flow, we have the get items, which will get all those items from my list, albeit I've implemented a top count of 10. And then I'm using that create HTML table action, which will take those 3 columns as headers and bring back through the dynamic values for employee, expense amount, and expense description. So that'll create us a basic HTML table. Now, if you've watched one of my earlier videos about creating emails, you'll see that you can use a style sheet. And so this is a cascading style sheet that allows you to implement changes to your border, to your table header, to your table data columns, add padding, how the text should be aligned, maybe what the color of the table header should be, and also create some of your own tags. So like I mentioned, this is cascading style sheets, but there are some email clients that will not accept these, or at least not accept all of these things. So we're also going to look at how to apply what's called inline styling. So the final part of this flow is send an email, and all I'm doing is sending an email to myself with that style as the first dynamic value there, and the create HTML table as the second one. And if we go ahead and run that and test it, when we jump over onto our Outlook, you can see that we have those 3 columns in an HTML table with some basic formatting, but there are things like, for instance, the expense amount, which is missing, well, in an ideal world, 2 decimal places. We have Lucy here, who should have 2.00. Again, these are things that I'm going to demonstrate in the video, showing you how you can address formatting issues. So if I jump over onto W3 Schools now, we're going to have a look at some HTML so we have some basic understanding before we build our Power Automate flow. And so I'll include a link to this particular page on my description, but it allows me to create HTML code on the left-hand side. This is the sample code that it gives you. And on the right-hand side, you can see what the output is. And so just to understand how this all comes together, we have our style, our cascading style sheet that we saw based on the content of that compose. And if I was to paste in that same style sheet that I had in my flow and run, you can see that the style of that particular table has now changed on the right-hand side. If we go further down the HTML, you can see that we have a table, and the things to now understand is you have an opening tag and a closing tag. So an opening tag we have for table here, a closing tag we also have for table, and the closing tag will always have a slash in it. So if we look at a particular table row, you can see again, I've highlighted that we have the opening tag and the closing tag for the table row. We then have the opening tag for table header and a closing tag for table header. And there are 3 lots of table header tags or table headers within that first table row. So we're going to create this data dynamically using Power Automate, but before I do that, I'd like to now show you how we can apply some styling, both as inline, but also using that cascading style sheet that we have at the top of our HTML. Now you can see that I have a value here called greater than 50. It's a class that I can call from within my HTML table. And if I wanted to change the text color of Mexico to red, I could go into this table data tag here and put class is equal to greater than 50. And it will pick up all the parameters here based on this class tag. So if I run that now, we'll see that on the right hand side, my text changes red. But what if we wanted to do this inline? Well, again, if we have a look at Centro Commercial, we can go into this TD tag, put a space and use style equals color. And we can define that color here either as hex or as a word, so red, yellow, green, blue, etc. If I hit run, you can now see that the text color has changed for that company name. Now, what if we wanted to apply a cell or a row color? Well, if we want to change the row color of the middle row, we could go into that opening tag, and you'll note that it's always the opening tag where you go and apply these parameters, and I can paste in style is equal to background color and then the word yellow. And what will happen now is when I hit the run button, you can see that we have that middle row, or the first row of the table after the header, is now yellow. And then finally, if we wanted to change the background color and the text color of, say, Francisco Shang, if we go into the TD tag here, the table data tag, if I paste in the background color is equal to this hex value and the color is equal to yellow and hit the run button, you can now see that their cell has changed to blue, but the text has changed to yellow. And these are some of the basic principles of formatting and HTML tables that you need to understand in order for this to work in Power Automate. So what we're going to do now is we're going to start building out our flow. And I've started here with a basic flow that includes the get items to get those items from that expenses list, but also that cascading style sheet in a compose. Now the next thing we want to do is to use one of my favorite actions, a select. And it's with that select that we're going to loop through all the values that are returned back from the get items. And this will then allow us to repurpose that data. Now, there are two ways of potentially doing this. The first way is to use the traditional key and value. And I found that to be the most successful method. The other way is to put it into text mode. And it's here that you can then start defining your HTML. But in order for it to accept a string, you need to put that into the double quotes like so. And I found that if you save and then edit the flow at a later stage, it'll actually remove those double quotes and you'll end up with an error message. So I've decided to go down the route of the key and the value, and it just means that we have to add in one additional step in order to get this to work. So the key name is kind of irrelevant, just as long as you remember what you call it. I'm going to call mine HTML. And then within the value, we're going to define all of our rows, because what this select will do is it will loop through all of the data from within our get items. So if there are 5 individual items that are returned, the select will loop 5 times. And we need to create those opening and closing tags for our rows. So to get started, I'm going to do the open and close brackets for TR, and then also the /TR to give us those opening and closed brackets. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add in the table data tag. So again, an opening and a closing tag for table data. I have 3 individual columns, so I need to put in 3 lots of opening and closing tags. So if I copy that, make sure you put in a couple of returns, and then you should be able to paste into the spare line. So there we go. And it will actually make it a lot easier if I format things like so that I can see my opening and closing tag for table row, and then my 3 lots of table data tags. Now jumping back onto W3 Schools, what we're trying to create is the following. You can see here I have the table row opening tag and the table row closing tag, and then 3 lots of table data tags. Back onto this flow, we now need to bring across some of that dynamic content. And to give us the basics of a table, If we were to scroll down now and get the employee description, and the amount, I'll just do a quick search for an amount, there we go. You can see that I have, in between these table data tags, I've inserted those dynamic values, and that will give us the basics of table row without any conditional formatting. And I'll continue on, create a table, test it, and then we can go and implement some of this conditional formatting. So the next step is all about another select. So we did a key value pair there. We ideally want to remove that key name, and we can do that using a select. So using the output from the above select, we can put this select into the text mode. And then if you remember, I said, remember the name that you've defined your key. Mine is called HTML. So with the following expression, item, open close brackets, question mark, square brackets and single quotes, we've got HTML. I can say OK to that, and that will just bring through the values that we've defined here in a new array. So I'm just going to give this a new name. We'll call it select HTML rows. Now with that defined, we need to have the opening and closing tags for our table, but we also need to have that table header. And I'm going to do that using a compose. So next what we need to do within this compose is to add in our table tag. So our opening tag and our closing tag for table. And then we need to define our opening table row, which will include the table header. So again, an opening and closing table row tag. And we just systematically build this up. So within that table row, we need to have the table head or table header, and we can have an opening and closing table header tag. And if I was to highlight that, copy it, I can then paste it in 2 more times. So I've got 3 lots of table headers. Based on the data above, we have the employee, the expense description, and the expense amount. And this is in effect the keys that you have. So we'll have the employee, we'll have the expense description, and we'll have the amount. And then finally, if we go to the end of that closing table row tag, we need to insert the table rows that we've generated from the select above. And we do that using the join expression. So we can type in join, we can go to dynamic content, we can select that select HTML rows output, and we can simply join on single quotes. So nothing, it will just create one long string of all of those rows. Now this is our HTML table. It would be good to test it, so let's go ahead and send an email. And if we quickly just chuck in an email address there, we can call it a test HTML table, and we basically want to ensure that what we've created works before adding in that conditional logic. So we need to have the style first, then the compose that has our HTML table, and if we test it, we can jump across into our email, and you can see there that we have our basic table with the employee, the expense description, and the amount. So with that in place, we can now look at doing the conditional formatting. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to change the cell color for employee Damien, and I would like to apply some formatting to this amount, and we'll also change the row color and the text color as well. So we'll go ahead and implement all those changes now. So if I jump across onto W3 Schools again, if we just recap what we've done, we've created a table, we've created some table rows. What we want to do now is to inject the style based on particular conditions, or in fact the class, again based on particular conditions. We know that if we inject the style into the table row, then we'll get a whole row in a particular color. If we inject the style into a table data tag like so, we know that that particular cell will adopt that style. Jumping back onto our flow, this is where we're going to start applying our conditional logic. And I would like to apply some conditional logic onto the table row. So I go to the opening table row tag, and the logic is going to be based on if the employee is equal to Damien, then I want it to be in yellow, that whole table row, otherwise no formatting. In order to explain that, I'm going to bring up my Notepad+, and you'll see at the top here, as I've highlighted, I have an expression, and it's based on if that employee, which is item, open close brackets, square brackets, and employee, is equal to Damien. And note this is case sensitive, so you might need to use two upper or two lower if you've got a variation of those strings. And then we're injecting this style. So the style is in single quotes, and you'll see that everything that I've highlighted between is the HTML. But you'll also note that rather than a single quote like we had on W3 Schools, I have double single quotes, and that's because you need to escape the single quotes with two single quotes. So that's not double quotes, that is two individual single quotes. And so with this expression, if that employee is equal to Damien, it will provide the string here that has the background color set to yellow. Otherwise, it has this single quotes here, which is nothing. So if it's not Damien, there'll be nothing output as part of that if expression. So if I copy that, jump back onto my flow, go into the expression tab here and paste it in, I can hit OK, and we have our first expression in there that will check to see if the employee is equal to Damien, set the background color to yellow. Let's go ahead and test. So jumping onto Outlook, we can see now that anyone with employee name Damien is highlighted in yellow. Let's see if we can make a change now to a particular cell. So back into Notepad+, my next expression here again is checking to see if an employee is equal to Damien, but this time it's setting the background color to blue and the color to white. So again, if we look at what's in between these single quotes, we have style equals, and then we have background color is blue, followed by a semicolon, and then color, which is the text color, is equal to white. And you'll note that we have those escaped single quotes. So I have two single quotes there and two single quotes here, which marks the end of this particular string. And then the whole thing is in single quotes. So it does look a bit odd. You have three single quotes at the end here, but it's all because this particular string with the color white and the background color blue is in single quotes, but we need to double escape that with double single quotes. And then of course the whole thing is a string, so it needs to be in single quotes again. And like before, the else option is nothing. So if it doesn't equal Damien, we're not going to have a background color of blue and a text color of white. If I go ahead and copy that, this time what I'd like to do is I would like to highlight the employee name. So rather than implementing that logic on the TR tag, I'm going to implement it on the TD tag, which is our table data, and it will target a specific cell. So into my expression, I can paste that expression in that I've copied, hit OK. We can see now that we have that expression in the table data tag. And again, I'm going to go ahead and test that. Again, jumping into Outlook, we can see that I have Damien highlighted in blue, that single cell, but the rest of the row is all in yellow. Now, equally, I could apply different logic for different employees. John and Lucy could be different colors, etc. So the third example is all about applying some different text color, but based on that style sheet. So if you remember, we had a greater than 50 style within that compose action, and we want to inject this string here. So class is equal to greater than 50. Again, we have those double single quotes because we need to escape them, and the whole thing is in single quotes. And we just have an if expression with a greater than. I've wrapped the expense amount in a float because we're retrieving monetary values that have decimal, and it will either be treated as a string and get an error, or it will be treated as an integer, which will mean it will remove the decimal value. And we need to make sure that it is definitely above 50. So I'm using float. You can see the highlighted brackets here around the item for the expense amount, and the greater is checking that it is greater than 50. So if it is, we return that class for greater than 50. Otherwise, again, we return an empty string. I'll go ahead and copy that. And if I jump down to the table data tag for the expense amount, I can go into the expression builder here, paste in that expression, hit OK, and let's go ahead and test again. We expect that text to be read if the amount is greater than 50. And so we can see now that any amount that's greater than 50 is highlighted in red, and 2, 6.22 and 0.93 are still in black writing. Now let's see if we can sort out the formatting for our amount. So onto our fourth expression, you can see here I have used format number for that expense amount, and set the format to 0.00. So that'll make sure that we always have 2 decimal points. I'll go ahead and copy that. And where I currently have the dynamic value for expense amount, I'm actually going to remove that. And between the opening and the closing table data tags, I'm going to insert that expression, which is going to change the format of that number. Now you might want to do something with dates and times. So equally, you might want to use format date time or parse date time within the table data tag. So when I hit OK, note that this expression is between the opening and the closing tag of the table data tags. So it'd also be quite nice to have a pound sign. So I'm going to go ahead and click in here and add a pound sign. And again, if we save and test, jump onto our Outlook, we can now see that those amounts are all neatly formatted with a pound sign and those decimal points. Now, what if we wanted to append a string to an existing value based on a condition? So again, using equals. If the expense description is equal to food, we want to append this emoji of grapes, otherwise a drinks emoji. If I jump back onto my flow where I have that expense description, rather than removing that, I'm going to go in between the opening and closing tag for table data. I can then go to the expression tab, paste in that expression, hit OK, and you'll see that within that opening and closing tag, we have the expense description followed by that if expression. If I test that, we'll now get one of 2 emojis based on that condition. And we can now see that within our Outlook. Now, in my original screenshot, you'll have noted that I had an ID column that included a link that will take you right back to that particular ID or item within the SharePoint list. And so I'm going to jump back into my flow and I'm going to insert a new column. So the first thing I need to do is in the select, I need to go and add in a new table data set of pairs here, opening and closing table datas. And I want to now inject an href, which is a link to a URL. So I can do href is equal to single quotes and a closing bracket there. And there's also a pair. So you have the /a. And then in between these opening and closing tags, you can put in the text you want to be clickable. So I'm going to say item ID and put a semicolon, and then I'm going to bring across the dynamic value for the ID. So we'll just go and search for that. There we go. In these single quotes, I want to include a link. So if I just go and search for link, we have link to item. And you can see now I've introduced a clickable link that has the text item ID and then the ID of the actual item. So that's introduced a new column, but I haven't yet included a new header. So if I go back into the compose here, I need to introduce a new table header so that I have a pair for both of them. So again, opening and closing table header tags, and this can be the task ID. So if we save that and test it, jumping back into our email, you can now see that we have that clickable link. And if I was to go and click on task 240, for instance, you can see that it's opened up that particular task in my SharePoint list. Okay, so with all that learning now out of the way, let's see about trying to create a vertical table. And I've got a flow here that's pre-built. I'm using the get items to get 10 items again from my list. And then I'm going to be turning those 3 columns on their side so that we end up with 3 rows. And of course, the first column will now be our column names. So I'm using select for each of those rows, and a slightly different method. I'm using the text method rather than the array method. So you'll see I now just have a string in single quotes with the opening and closing tags for table data, and I have that employee dynamic value. I do the same for the expense description, but for the 3rd row, I'm using a concatenation. So again, bringing the opening and closing bracket together, but with an expression that includes the item, open close brackets, question mark, and expense amount in the single quotes and brackets. Now, the reason I've brought that in as the 3rd row is purely just to demonstrate it to you, because when you come to edit your flow, if you're using this map, and you have dynamic content, you will find that Power Automate will strip out the quotes. So by using a concat, you don't then have an issue. I did consider using a concat for the demo earlier on, but I actually found it easier to use two select statements, one to create your key value pair, and the second to then pull that data into an array. So that's why a slightly different method earlier on in the video. So with this done, 3 lots of selects, we now have all the table data tags with the column data in a row, and then we simply have, as before, our table tags, so our opening including table tags. We have our table row, which includes our opening table data column names, so we have the employee, we have the employee description, and we have the expense amount. And you'll notice that I've injected some background color, so that will be gray. So our first column will be gray. And then for each of those rows, I'm simply using the join expression to join the output or the body of each of those selects on nothing. So it's just bringing together the array as a string. And that's the same for each one, row 2 and row 3. So we've built a table there. We've turned that table on its side, and I have the styling again before including it all in an email. So we've got that compose style, and we have the vertical table that we've created. So if I go ahead and test that, jumping across into my email, you can now see that we have that vertical table. Our first column is our header, and then every column after that are each of the individual rows. And hopefully with some of this learning, you can apply some conditional logic, go and change some of those cell column colors, text colors, change the formatting for the expense amounts, you name it, you go for it. Let me know in the comments below what you get up to, and thanks very much for watching. Cheers, bye.